If you're currently wearing a suit and have a badge that says Federal Bureau of Investigation on it, you should probably just close this tab and go find a hobby like knitting or something, because we're about to talk about how to make your entire job basically impossible. And I'm not saying you should actually do any of this, because that would be a very bad idea, and my lawyer is already sweating just looking at me right now. So let's just pretend this is all for a very long and weird book I'm writing.
Okay.
So, you've accidentally done something that made the most powerful guys in the world want to have a very long conversation with you in a room with no windows, and you need to disappear like yesterday. And the good news is that hiding from the FBI is actually kind of easy if you stop acting like a movie character and start acting like a really boring guy who likes plain toast and beige pants. The first thing you have to understand is that the FBI is basically a giant computer that eats information. And if you give the computer too much information, it starts to get a little bit confused. So we're going to look at the digital smokescreen strategy, which is like the ultimate hook for anyone who spends too much time on TikTok. You see, most people think hiding means deleting your accounts and throwing your phone in a river, but that is exactly what a guilty person does, and the FBI can track that silence like a bloodhound smells a steak. So instead of going silent, you want to create so much noise that they can't hear the truth. I remember reading about this absolute madman named John McAfee, the guy who made the antivirus software your dad still uses, and back in 2012, he was basically the final boss of hiding in plain sight. Like, he was being looked at for some high-level computer stuff and some other serious trouble in Belize. And instead of just running away like a normal person, he set up what he called his digital smokescreen, which was basically a script that posted thousands of fake location tags for him all over the world every single hour. So one minute, the FBI and local police think he's getting a coffee in Paris, and the next minute, he's supposedly at a cat cafe in Tokyo. And they have to spend their limited budget and time checking out every single one of these leads while he's actually just sitting in a basement in Ohio eating Cheetos. Actually, he wasn't even in Ohio. I'm pretty sure he was hiding in the jungles in Guatemala and writing a blog about how he was winning the game. Like, he literally wrote a post telling everyone he had successfully spoofed his location so many times that the government's tracking computers were basically melting. But the funniest part about this whole genius plan is how it actually ended. Because while John was being a digital ghost, he invited these two journalists from Vice magazine to come interview him. And they took a photo of him and uploaded it online into their Google Docs or something for later use when writing their journal. But they did this without checking the settings on their iPhone, and since they didn't scrub the GPS metadata, which is like the digital fingerprint every photo leaves behind, it told the entire world exactly where they were standing, down to the specific shack in the woods. So after weeks of being this high-level hacker mastermind who was everywhere and nowhere at the same time, he got caught because some reporter forgot to turn off their location services, which is just like the most embarrassing way to go out. It is a great example of how you can be the smartest guy in the room with the coolest scripts, but you're only as safe as the dumbest person in your group chat. And if you think that sounds expensive or like you need to be a hacker, you really don't, because there's already apps and services you can buy for like $20 that do this for you. You're basically using the same bots influencers use to get fake followers, but you're using them to make the FBI follow a ghost. And it's so funny because these agents are trained to follow the data. But when the data says you're in 50 countries at once, the whole system just starts to lag like a Chromebook trying to run Minecraft with the shaders turned all the way up. It's the main character move where you turn yourself into a glitch in their system. And while they're busy filing paperwork for a search warrant in a country that doesn't even exist, you're already on to the next stage of the plan, which is the ghost identity meta. Now, you can't just be a digital ghost because eventually you're gonna get hungry and you're gonna need to buy a sandwich. And if you use your own credit card, you might as well just walk into the local field office and turn yourself in right now. Most people think you need a fake ID from a guy in a dark alley, but that's a great way to get scammed or caught immediately, because those IDs are usually trash. So what the pros do is they look for identity life cycles, which sounds fancy, but it really just means finding someone who doesn't need their identity anymore. I heard a story about a guy who spent months looking through old newspapers for people who were born around the same time as him, but had passed away a long time ago. Then, he would apply for a new copy of their birth certificate and use that to get a real social security card and a real driver's license. It sounds super dark, and it kinda is, but it is one of the only ways to get clean papers that'll actually pass a check by a police officer who pulls you over for any reason he pleases these days. And if you're wondering how a regular person does this without being a super spy, you basically just have to be really good at doing research on the internet and being patient. because the government is surprisingly slow at connecting the dots between different departments. Don't feel guilty that you're stealing from a living person, which would get you caught fast. After all, you've already committed some kind of terrible felony that got the literal FBI sniffing for your tracks. So you're just borrowing a name that the system thinks is still active. And once you have those papers, you stop being John Doe and you become Steve the Plumber, who has a clean record and pays his taxes on time. The trick here is to be as boring as possible because the FBI is looking for a fugitive. And nobody expects a fugitive to be a guy who works at a hardware store and has a library card. So you want to lean into that average Joe energy and never do anything that would make someone look at you twice. Like, if you start acting like you're in an action movie and wearing sunglasses inside and looking over your shoulder every 5 seconds, you're gonna get caught because you look like a weirdo. But if you walk around in a polo shirt and just talk about how much you hate the local sports team, you become invisible and just another face in the crowd. Now, some people think that the best way to hide is to go deep into the woods and build a bunker like a prepper, but I'm gonna be honest with you, this is actually the bad strategy on the list. And I don't recommend it at all unless you really like mosquitoes and eating cold beans out of a can. The problem with the Deep Woods plan is that humans are actually really bad at living alone in the wild, and you'll eventually have to come out for supplies or because you got a toothache that makes you want to cry, you know. Plus, the FBI has satellites and heat-seeking drones that can see a campfire from space, so if you're the only human being for 50 miles and you start a fire to cook your squirrel dinner, you're basically sending a giant "here I am" signal to the sky. I remember reading about a guy who tried to live in a cave for 2 years and he ended up getting caught because he had to go to a local library to use the internet to check his email. And the librarian thought he smelled like a wet dog and called the police. It's a very lonely way to live, and it usually ends with you being so miserable that you actually want to get caught just so you can have a warm bed and a meal that doesn't involve fur. The prepper build sounds cool in movies, but in real life, it's just a slow way to lose your mind while being bitten by ticks. And it's much smarter to hide where the people are because it's way easier to find one specific grain of sand on a beach than it is to find a bright light in a dark room. Or did I just mix up those two metaphors? Whatever. So now you probably don't want to stay in one place and you feel like the walls are closing in. So that's when you move into the van life nomad strategy, which is basically the most popular thing on YouTube right now anyway. The FBI is really good at finding people who have an address because an address is like a permanent marker on a map. But if your address changes every single night because you're sleeping in a different Walmart parking lot, their job becomes a total nightmare. I've seen those guys who buy an old white work van, the kind that looks like something a plumber or an electrician would own, and they turn the inside into a literal mini mansion with a bed and a stove and even a little shower. The genius of the white van strat is that there are millions of them on the road and nobody ever looks at them twice because they're the most boring vehicles in existence. If you drive a bright red sports car, everyone turns heads to look at it, snap some photos, maybe try to hit you up. But if you drive a white Ford Transit, you're basically invisible. And if you're worried about money, a lot of these nomads make cash by doing gig work under their new ghost name, or they just use the money they saved up before they had to run. You can move from state to state and stay in national parks or on public land where it's totally legal to park for free. And by the time the FBI tracks down your last known location to a gas station in Nevada, you're already halfway across the border into Oregon. It's like playing a game of hide and seek where the base is always moving, and the person who's it has to follow a trail that's already cold. And as long as you stay away from big cities with lots of cameras and face recognition tech, you can stay on the road for years without ever being spotted. This leads to the urban camouflage strategy, which is what you do when you want to hide in a place like New York City or Tokyo, where there are so many people that everyone has basically stopped looking at each other. In a big city, everyone's the main character of their own story, and they don't have time to worry about the guy sitting next to them on the subway who's reading a newspaper and wearing a generic hat. You can work under-the-table jobs like washing dishes, doing construction, where they pay you in cash and nobody asks for your ID. And as long as you stay away from the hot zones like tourist spots where there are tons of cops, you can blend in perfectly. I actually heard about a guy who lived in a busy apartment building for 5 years while he was on the run, and he made sure to be the nice neighbor who always helped people carry their groceries and never made any noise. Because he was so nice, nobody ever suspected that he was a criminal. Or even when the FBI put his picture on the news, his neighbors just thought, "Oh, that looks a little bit like Dave, but Dave's a sweetheart who loves gardening, so it can't be him." You're basically using human psychology against the government because the FBI thinks in terms of profiles and patterns, but If you act completely different from the profile of a bad guy, their brain just skips right over you. It's like being a ninja, but instead of wearing black pajamas, you're wearing a Best Dad t-shirt and carrying a bag of bagels. And it's honestly one of the most effective ways to stay free because you're hiding in plain sight and using the city's own chaos as your shield. If things get really heated, some people try the sovereign citizen or religious shield move, which is where you join a very strict religious group or a commune that doesn't like the government very much. These groups are usually protective of their members, and they don't like it when outsiders like the FBI come around asking questions. So they might help you hide or give you a place to stay where the law doesn't have a lot of power. It's kind of a bad, boring case though, because you have to follow a lot of weird rules and you might have to give up your phone and your personality just to fit in. And honestly, some of these groups are scarier than the FBI themselves. They use these legal loopholes where they claim that they're their own country or that they only follow God's law. And while that doesn't actually work in a real court, it can buy you a lot of time because the FBI has to be very careful about religious freedom, and they don't want another situation where they look like the bad guys for raiding a church. So you basically trade your freedom for a different kind of prison where you have to pray 6 times a day and eat nothing but kale. But for most people, that's just not a vibe. It's a desperate move for when you have nowhere else to go, and it's definitely one of those strategies that sounds better on paper than it feels when you're waking up at 4 a.m. to milk a goat in a commune that thinks electricity is a sin. But if you're really serious about changing your life, you might have to look at the biological pivot, which is a fancy way of saying that you need to change the way you look, so much so that your own mom wouldn't recognize you. Most people think this means expensive plastic surgery, like in a spy movie, but you can actually do a lot with just a few $100s and some dedication. Like if you're a skinny guy with short hair, you spend a year getting really buff at a local gym and growing a huge beard and dyeing your hair a completely different color. The FBI's facial recognition software is good, but it really struggles when you change your silhouette, which is the basic shape of your body and face. If you gain or lose 50 pounds, your face shape changes, your neck changes, and even the way you walk changes. I remember hearing about a fugitive who escaped because he stopped wearing his glasses and started wearing a toupee and gained a bunch of weight, and he walked right past the agents who were looking for him because they were looking for a thin guy with glasses. You can also get distraction tattoos, which are big, bright tattoos in very visible places, because the human brain is lazy and it'll focus on the tattoo instead of the actual features on your face. If you've never had tattoos before and you suddenly had one on an easily visible part of your body, you're gonna pass right through their checks. Or if a witness says he had a giant flaming skull on his neck, the police are gonna look for a guy with a flaming skull. So if you just cover that tattoo with makeup or a turtleneck, you've basically deleted the only thing they remember about you. It's like a user interface hack for the human eye, and it's a very real-world way to change your main character look without needing a Hollywood special effects team. Now we're getting into the high-level stuff, which is the non-extradition escape. And this is where you leave the country entirely to go somewhere where the FBI doesn't have any power to arrest you. Places like Russia or certain parts of the Middle East or South America, they're famous for this because they don't have those extradition treaties with the US, which basically means that if the US asks them to send you back, they just say no and hang up the phone. Most people think this is only for rich guys with private jets, but if you're smart, you can do a poor man's version by teaching English in a remote village or doing remote computer work from a beach in a country that doesn't care who you are as long as you pay your rent. The hardest part is actually getting out of the country because airports are basically giant traps with cameras and fingerprint scanners. So you have to look at alternative routes, like taking a bus across the border to Mexico or Canada and then flying out from there. It's a huge risk because if you get caught at the border, GG's, it's game over. But if you make it to a safe haven country, you're basically untouchable as long as you don't do anything to make the local government mad. You have to learn the new language and live in a new culture, and it can be really hard to be away from your family, but it is the ultimate W for someone who wants to start a completely new life where the FBI's badge is just a piece of shiny metal that means nothing. Next, we have the most intense and most action-packed strategy on the list, and this is the dead man switch or the leverage strategy, which is so crazy that I almost didn't include it because it's basically the nuclear option of hiding. This is what you do when you have something that the FBI wants more than they want you, like secret data or evidence of something they did wrong. And you set up a system where if you get arrested, that information is automatically sent to every major news station in the world. It's like the ultimate Uno reverse card because you're telling the most powerful agency in the world that if they touch you, you will burn their house down. I heard about a guy who had a dead man's switch set up on a secure server where he had to log in every 24 hours or a bunch of secret documents would be released to the public. Because of this, the FBI couldn't just disappear him or put him in a secret jail, because the moment they do that, the files would go live and it would be a total disaster for them. This is the most dangerous game you can play because you're basically holding a live grenade and hoping the other person is more scared than you are. And it requires a huge amount of technical skill and nerves of steel. You're now basically in a high-stakes poker game where the pot is your life and the cards are the secrets you're holding over their heads. This is the strategy that keeps billionaires and high-level whistleblowers alive, and it is the peak of the hiding meta because it turns you from a victim into a player in the global game of power. By the time you've reached this level, you've realized that the world isn't just about good guys and bad guys, because another key factor comes into play. Who has the most information, and who's willing to play the game the hardest? If you execute these strategies right, you turn from a criminal trying to hide or flee to a new someone whose identity was rebuilt so that the system can't track, can't find, and eventually can't touch you. Now, I'm not saying you should go out and break the law just to see if you can win this game, and I'm definitely not saying that I would ever do any of this because I like my life, and I really like being able to go to the grocery store without wearing a fake mustache. But if you did decide to quit being a regular citizen and speedrun the entire fugitive life by throwing the legal manual out the window, you're either going to be sitting on a beach in a country you can't pronounce, or you're going to be spending the next 40 years making license plates in a very small room. See you in the next one, if I haven't been caught by the FBI by then.